If you ask most marketers how to grow a brand, they'll probably start talking about positioning, messaging, media plans, or creative campaigns. They might even talk about the four or more P's of marketing. All of those things matter, of course. Considering them as independent things, however, hides an important truth. The key question is, how do we design a system that's engineered to produce consistent growth? That may sound like a subtle distinction, but I think it's an important one. Take a Formula One car. Nobody would suggest that the engine alone is the reason it wins races. The aerodynamics matter, so does the suspension, the electronics, and of course the driver, the pit lane technicians, and tyre strategy. Improving any of those components in isolation will probably make a small difference. But the really big gains come from designing the whole system so that every component works well together in order to win the race. Brand growth works in much the same way, yet businesses tend to break everything down into separate disciplines. Product teams focus on innovation. Brand teams develop positioning, while sales teams worry about distribution. Media agencies decide which channels to use. Meanwhile, performance marketers concentrate on conversions. Everyone becomes very good at improving their own piece of the puzzle. Yet few organizations step back and ask themselves the key question: have all the pieces been designed to work well together? That's what I mean by a brand operating system. It's not an alternative planning process. It's a way of thinking about the relationships between the decisions we make in each area. Everything begins with the ambitions of the business. Before discussing communications or media budgets, we need to understand what sort of growth the organization is actually trying to achieve, what resources it can invest, and which capabilities it already possesses. These factors inevitably constrain everything that follows, so it seems logical to start there. The next question is where that growth is going to come from. In other words, which buying occasions or category entry points offer the biggest opportunity? Which consumer needs are we trying to satisfy? Which situations do we want our brand to come to mind for? These aren't simply communications decisions. They influence product development, pricing, innovation, and distribution as much as advertising. That's why the next stage in the framework focuses on the portfolio itself. Do we have the right products at the right price points to compete in those buying occasions? If we don't, no amount of clever advertising is likely to solve the problem. Equally, a brilliant product strategy becomes much more valuable when it's built around occasions that genuinely matter to consumers. Already, you can see the system emerging. The buying occasions we choose influence our portfolio strategy, but our current portfolio also determines which buying occasions we can realistically compete for. The relationship works in both directions. That's true throughout the framework. Every component shapes the others. The same is true when we think about memory. Once we've decided where we want to compete, we need to establish the distinctive brand assets and need codes that will help consumers recognize us quickly and connect the brand with those buying occasions. These mental shortcuts do not appear overnight. They have to be built consistently over time, and they become the bridge between strategy and communications. Of course, creating demand is only half the challenge. People also need to be able to find and buy the product easily, which is why availability occupies such a central place in the framework. Physical and mental availability have often been discussed as complementary ideas, but I think they're even more closely connected than that. The channels you prioritize, the retailers you invest in, and the partnerships you build should all reinforce the occasions and associations you want to establish in consumers' minds. Only then do we arrive at media. I find it interesting that media planning is often where marketing conversations begin. In reality, they should probably come much later, once we've established the business ambition, chosen the buying occasions, developed the right portfolio, identified the distinctive assets we want to build, and secured distribution, we can finally ask which channels are best suited to building mental availability. The job of brand building communications is no longer simply to create awareness. It's to reinforce the memory structures we've already decided are strategically important. Alongside this sits demand capture. Search, retail media, CRM, promotions, and performance marketing all play a vital role, but they work best when the rest of the system has already done its job. Activation doesn't replace brand building. It converts the demand that brand building and distribution have helped to create. And that's really the central idea behind the framework. It's easy to think of these 7 elements as boxes on a diagram, but they aren't. They're interconnected parts of a living system. Changing one element changes the effectiveness of several others. A stronger portfolio makes distribution easier. Better distribution increases the return on brand building investment. Consistent, distinctive brand assets improve the efficiency of both brand building and activation. And successful activation generates the revenue that ultimately funds future innovation and communications. The point isn't simply that all of these things matter, it's that they have to work together. Perhaps that's why I've become less interested in communications plans over the years and more interested in growth systems. Plans describe activities. Systems explain interactions. And while activities can certainly create short-term results, it's usually the quality of the system that determines whether a brand continues to grow year after year.